So we are officially on summer schedule over here on the Bleach Hub channel, meaning uploads are going to increase drastically. If everything goes according to plan, I should be uploading now every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So I hope you guys are looking forward to the deluge of content that I'm going to be dropping during the summer. But we're continuing our trend of covering each of the captains of the Gote 13, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about Shunsui. But if you enjoy this Bleach power scaling content, be sure to give your boy that like and subscribe. It really does help the videos out and it helps the channel out, and it's greatly appreciated. But if you want to go that extra mile, you can click that join button and become a channel member and gain access to hidden content here on the channel, such as debates and past live streams. But with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into this video and talk about how impressive our boy Shunsui is. Now, Shunsui is not exactly regarded as a weak character. I'm sure as we go through the different arcs, people are going to be like, yeah, I mean, Shunsui's kind of a bad dude. He's running a bloody warpath in every single arc. He's always getting to do something fairly impressive no matter what he's doing or who he's fighting, right? But there's a few things here and there that I think might surprise some people and just be a good refresher on what the guy's actually done. So, going into the Soul Society arc, everybody remembers how bad Shunsui spanked Chad, right? Like, it was a very iconic battle because we all thought Chad was going to win. It was going to be some shonen moment. Chad's literally running and saying, with the power of my friendship between Ichigo and myself, I'm gonna bring this dude down. And Shunsui was having none of it. Literally one-shot him by cutting through with his base Zanpakuto, not the Shikai. Literally the base katana is what he used to bring down Chad. And even before that, he was weaving Chad's energy blasts with his bare hand. Keeping in mind that Chad is capable of one-shotting lieutenants and seated officers with even his base right arm, let alone the blast themselves, and he's just weaving that with his bare hands. But what comes out from this fight is actually a statement that makes Shunsui and Kenpachi somewhat relative, because in the chapter little description thing that we get for every volume where Kubo tries to inform new viewers or returning viewers about the plot, he says, well, Ichigo is fighting this fearsome opponent named Kenpachi, and Kenpachi's just this ultimate beast of a man. However, it says that Chad is actually facing a fearsome opponent of his own, which is a subtle way of saying that they're both fighting very fierce battles. It can also be relative to their situation, but I think from what we see later on in the arc where Shunsui and Jushiro get to go fight Yamamoto, and they don't just blatantly die instantly, and actually, in fact, Shunsui cancels out Yamamoto's SP when he calms down Nanao, because Nanao is being overwhelmed by Yamamoto's passive spiritual pressure, but Shunsui putting his hand on Nanao's head literally negates the effects of Yamamoto trying to soul crush Nanao. And then on top of that, Yamamoto says Shunsui and Jushiro are peerless. They were always in a class of their own, even meaning that currently, right now, there's still these two peerless Shinigami in the Soul Society, which does give more credence to that statement of, well, Ichigo's fighting a fierce opponent, but Chad's also fighting someone fierce. It's almost like in a narrative sense, Shunsui and Kenpachi are competing for who is the most fierce Shinigami at that moment. So already in the first arc, the Soul Society arc, Shunsui's off to a very powerful start, and it only gets better from here, because he gets the grandiose treatment in the Fate Karakura Town arc, because he gets to fight who is the quote-unquote strongest Espada, although that's like right before Yami does his whole zero thing. But at the time of him fighting, literally, when the fight starts, it's like, oh snap, Shunsui gets to fight the strongest Espada, Stark. And literally, the intro to the battle is Stark saying, hey, Toshiro just took out Hollybell, are you stronger than him? And Shunsui's like, well, I don't know, man, in 100 years, he may surpass me. And Stark replies by saying, oh, so you're still stronger than Toshiro, who just took out Hollybell, who's the number 3. So they're already really hyping up Shunsui. He's able to bob and weave through Stark's arrows pretty casually, even when Stark is predicting where Shunsui's going to land. Shunsui's still capable of dodging those arrows, even point blank. It's very impressive. And Stark does have him on the back foot at the beginning of the fight, where Shunsui thinks he might need to use his Bankai. As the fight goes on and Shunsui starts revealing what his Shikai can do and all of the different games that he can employ, he pretty much easily no-diff Stark. Now, do keep in mind this Stark is depressed as well. And your mental state in Bleach does actually affect your spiritual pressure, so Stark being depressed might have nerfed him down to the point where Shunsui could take him out with just his Shikai. However, it's also possible that Shunsui said that he wanted to use his Bankai as kind of a bluff, because that's Shunsui's whole thing, is kind of deception and kind of fighting that mental battle against his opponent. So it is possible that he's like, oh man, I might have to use my Bankai, especially when he knows that's what Stark is pushing him to try and see. You could argue it's more of that perspective, or, I mean, I do think it just makes sense that Stark is depressed, so he kind of weakened down to where Shunsui could just beat him with his Shikai alone. However, in some of the extra material for Bleach, they actually polled some fans and they asked them about this fight in specific. And a lot of the fans really liked the Stark versus Shunsui battle because they thought it was so evenly matched and it made Shunsui look impressive because he was able to bring down Espada number 1, Stark, without actually using his Bankai, where Soifon had to pull out her Bankai against Baragon, Toshiro needed his Bankai desperately against Hollybell, even Byakuya, who we do meme on him just thrashing Zomari, did actually have to use his Bankai on. And so it really does make Shunsui stand out as like one of the few people that beat an Espada without using their Bankai at all whatsoever. Then there's obviously the meme of Shunsui stabbing Aizen. However, we do gotta remember that this is under Kyoka Suigetsu. It's actually confirmed in the 3rd data book that if you do not see Ichigo looking around, like if you don't see him on panel, Kyoka Suigetsu is active. And that's why the first time Aizen actually gets seriously injured is against Ichigo, because Aizen's choosing to not use Kyoka Suigetsu against him. So no, unfortunately we can't meme and say that, oh, Shunsui stabbed Aizen, but we do have the very infamous statement from Kubo where he says, I don't know, I wanted fans to think that Shunsui could beat Aizen if he used his Bankai, and that's why I didn't have him use his Bankai against Stark, because I wanted that to be a little ambiguous. So you can still argue that maybe Shunsui could have taken out Aizen, just not for the reason that he was able to stab him, because I was under Kyoka Suigetsu. However, you could argue that in the illusion, Aizen allowed Shunsui to stab him because that's something that's believable, that's something that would happen. Because if Shunsui tried to stab Aizen and it didn't do any damage, Shunsui, who should be relative to Aizen, not being able to actually do that damage, would break the illusion. So you can maybe argue it both ways there. Then moving to the final arc, the 1000-Year Blood War, there's a very weird duality with Shunsui. There's the fact that with his Shikai, he and Robert are pretty even. They're both able to damage each other, although I do think Robert kind of had the upper hand in that battle. It's really irrelevant who you think had the upper hand because they're very relative. But then later on in the arc, Shunsui is scrapping with post-Ashwal and Lille. So there's a whole host of things that might have been going wrong during the first battle with Robert. Maybe Shunsui wasn't in the right mental landscape, especially because Yamamoto's destroying everything with his Bankai, and Yama also dies in the middle of the battle. Someone who's basically a father figure to Shunsui. So maybe he just wasn't all there for that battle, and it would maybe explain how he was able to finesse Lille so hard in that battle. And I say this all the time because there are some people that don't give Shunsui the credit that he deserves. Shunsui had Lille Baro dead to rights in every way imaginable. He beat base Lille, he beat the Nugget version, and even when the Owl version came out, he had the direct counter in the God Paddle. It's just, he couldn't use it directly. Thank God that Nanao showed up to actually just grab onto the paddle to actually activate it. Because then, right after then, Shunsui actually assists Nanao in using the paddle. Like, he literally grabs onto it as well to help her fight Lille Baro. Literally having the counter to him, just not being able to wield it himself directly. So yeah, very impressive for Shunsui that he basically beat Lille Baro by himself. He just needed Nanao to grab onto the God Paddle. It's very impressive because Lille is a part of the Schutzstaffel, which are stated to be Yuha's most powerful soldiers. So it does keep Shunsui pretty relevant when it comes to scaling. Although, an odd thing that I'll tack on here from Camp for Your Own World is that in the novel, Shunsui says that he's still not caught up to Yamamoto, and this could be interpreted a few different ways. Now, obviously you could say, okay, well, they're trying to say that Yamamoto is still relevant, still stronger than Shunsui, and I'm fine with that interpretation, because there are things that back that up. For instance, Yuha saying nobody else could contain Yamamoto's power. That would include people in the Schutzstaffel. And Shunsui is one of the characters that doesn't make any growth throughout the entire arc. Like, the powers he had at the beginning of the arc are the powers he had at the end of the arc, right? He didn't do any training midway through either. And we have a databook statement saying that Yamamoto, even with one arm, is still the strongest Shinigami. So I'm really fine with that interpretation, although I've seen some people say that maybe Shunsui just has admiration for Yamamoto and he really holds him in very high regard, and he's like, oh, I still haven't caught up to the old man. Like, maybe not just in terms of power, but in ways of leadership and being the captain commander, which also does make sense because you gotta remember Yamamoto's been the captain commander for literally over a millennia, whereas Shunsui's been the captain commander for like 2 days. So yeah, of course you're gonna feel a little underqualified. It's like if you became president after a guy that's had a really good long-standing presidency for like 80 years, and then you get in there for 2 days and you're like, man, I feel like I got big shoes to fill. So I'm really fine with either interpretation. You guys can argue that in the comments below amongst yourselves, but let's get into some of Shunsui's abilities and talk about what he can actually do in a fight. Now, Shunsui is one of those very rare Bleach characters that actually has a wide variety of abilities to use, and I think that's in part to how diverse his Zanpakuto can truly be. Now, the Shikai for his Zanpakuto turns children's games into reality, and it's based on stepping into the area of Katen Kyokotsu. Now, we don't know the exact range for that, but we do know it's pretty vast, and we also know the range for his Bankai is also quite vast, because Jushiro says you can't use it in Fake Karakura Town, because you'll drag everybody here into your Bankai. So we know there's like a city, town level range for it, which is very good. It's a very vast, wide open area. You're going to be pretty good in most versus battles, and you can actually look at his Shikai as being law manipulation, because what it does is in that set area, it sets rules in place, and if you don't follow the rules, you die. You literally lose the game. Which, being able to affect rules, being able to affect laws, those are very synonymous with one another. So if you want to say that his Shikai has reality warping and law manipulation, go ahead. Now, there's quite a few games we've seen from Shunsui, and they're all fairly useful. I mean, Bashugama's kind of garbage because it's literally just, here's some wind, and it like pushes your opponent away. But I guess if Shunsui's in an elemental battle and he needs the element of wind, he can provide it. Sure, that's cool. He has Ira Oni, which is the color game. The more deadly the color is for the user, the more damage that will be dealt. You guys have kind of seen this when he was fighting Stark. He takes off his robe. He's covered in all black, but he targets the black hollow hole in Stark, and he does maximum damage, even though he only cuts him because Shunsui is literally covered in black, and it's thus more dangerous for him to choose that color. He actually just one-shot Stark. Like, he outright obliterates him. So the damage modifier, while we don't know what it is quite massive, allowing him to one-shot people that are pretty relative, if not stronger than him. There's Kage Oni, which is the shadow game, which allows Shunsui to hide in the shadows, and unless you have prior knowledge of his Zanpakuto and you see a shadow on the ground, you're probably not going to be all that aware of it. I mean, even Stark, who is praised for being intelligent, does fall for it. He literally steps on it. But this also allows him to create actual, literal shadow clones, not the Naruto, like, oh, I made someone that looks like me, he's a doppelganger. These are literally shadow clones, which may be good for battles where Shunsui is relative to his opponent and he can just overwhelm them with sheer numbers. Finally, there's the teleportation / illusion game that he pulls on Lille Baro, which actually works against how good someone's ability to sense SP is, because he says, Lille, you guys are Quincy's, you're so good with SP that it makes it really good to trick you, because you're so honed on one thing, you don't trust your eyes. And so I'm going to hit you with this illusion, and then that allows Shunsui to just teleport around as well. So it's a very, very powerful Shikai, but the Bankai is absolutely insane. I mean, you knew it was going to be crazy whenever he activated it, because Ichigo, Chad, and all of them, they get the chills. They're like, dude, what is going on right now? But it has 4 different acts to it. The first act is shared damage, which is fairly good, but you can't actually kill your opponent with it, so Shunsui can't just decapitate himself and kill Lille. But it is going to make your opponent more apprehensive to actually damage you, because if you're sharing damage, I don't want to shoot you in the chest, because then I'm going to get shot in the chest, and that's going to really suck. The second act actually is disease manipulation, or biological manip, because it infects the target with an uncurable sickness, and assuming Shunsui has just a long time, he can infect his target with the Bankai, and then just leave. Be like, alright, have fun dying of that disease, buddy. Getting soul cancer or whatever he gives them. But then if he wants to continue on with the battle, he can sink the target into the abyss that they cannot escape from, and it literally drains all of their SP. Which actually might be useful in taking on opponents that are stronger than him, because if he just sinks them in there and they lose all of their spiritual pressure, they become vulnerable to his finishing move. The threads that he wraps around the target's neck decapitates them, and then blows up their head. It should also be known that the thread is made out of his Ryatsu, which is probably why he has to weaken them with the Abyss, because if your Ryatsu is weaker than somebody else, they could probably just snap out of the thread. But after being drained of all their SP and being put in a vulnerable state, he can use his Ryatsu to create the thread, decapitate them, blow up their head. It kind of counters regeneration as well, because more commonly you'll see regeneration based on somebody's head. So like you have like zombies, Wolverine, characters like that. You can get around whatever undead perk or whatever regeneration perk they have by just decapitating them and then for good measure blowing up their head. Also, as a final little side note, he summons his Zanpakuto spirit to help him in combat when he uses his Bankai, and Lille, a spiritually aware entity, could not see this spirit. So it's like you gotta have an extra level of spiritual awareness to actually be able to perceive the Zanpakuto spirit that he summons. I actually thought that was really, really powerful, and nobody ever brings it up. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Shunsui's a pretty big Giga Chad, and I need to get him that respect that he deserves. My Discord is linked in the description if that interests you at all. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.